Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, lovely people, depending on where you are watching us from in this beautiful world. I am so excited to have Cheryl Hutto with me today because I came across Cheryl via LinkedIn. I really, really love how many beautiful connections I have formed over the last couple of years on LinkedIn. Cheryl, you're one of them. You stood out for me. I saw what you were posting about, and I reached out and said, let's have a conversation. So after this conversation, I'm so grateful that we're bringing this live to our audience. Would you do us a favor and introduce yourself to our audience?
Yes, thank you, Marie. I'm delighted to be here. And of course, my name is Cheryl Hutto, and I am a, a, a coach or a mentor, sometimes, maybe I should be better calling it that, for care partners, predominantly family caregivers for loved ones. And I'm also a grief coach. I started as a coach for care partners, and it automatically led me into the interest and the topic of grief. So,
Yeah, that makes a lot
uh,
of sense. It's quite a natural transition. You and I had, as well said, a few words before we went live as well. And there's one topic in particular that I feel, you feel, we both know is not talked about enough, or not very often, I should say. And just in this beautiful spirit of unsilence grief, I asked you to maybe do that for us. And that topic is ambiguous grief. Can you share with our audience? For some people, they might wonder, what does that even mean? What is that? Maybe you want to share your story, how you even got to that particular topic, if you don't mind.
sure, I'll begin with a little bit of my own story. I
Sure.
uh, probably about 15 years ago, my wife Belle announced to me one day. We went paddling on a local pond and
Mm,
got off the pond and onto a rock. And she looked at me and she said to me, "Cheryl, I have something to tell you. I have Alzheimer's."
mm,
And I felt at that point like part of me slid off that rock to the bottom of the pond and stayed there for a very long time. And of course, as we all do when we get an announcement or information about a diagnosis of a loved one like that, we almost sort of in desperation claw to find the answer and come
yeah.
up with. I thought, this can't be happening. This can't be real. But at any rate, and it was real, except that she did not have a diagnosis of Alzheimer's. My wife Belle has a different diagnosis, sometimes called Benson's syndrome or
Hmm.
post-cortical atrophy. She's highly functional, which allows me to do this work. So I
Mm,
ended up going to, fast forward, I ended up getting training as a coach. And I said to her, "I'm not sure who should coach. I haven't gained and lost 100 pounds." And she said,
yeah,
"Caregiver." And I started that journey and have never looked back.
that's
So I
incredible.
one on one and facilitate groups and volunteer for Alzheimer's Association, etc. But
Mm,
what I come to over time and has become a very big focus is the idea of self-care and encouraging other care
yeah.
partners to take care of themselves. Why can't they do it? And I've
Mm,
realized they have a real difficulty doing it because there's something much bigger going on. And that is this idea of ambiguous grief.
mm, yeah.
And
Before we
go
go
ahead.
any further, I just have one quick question. Can you share a little bit about what your life was like before the diagnosis and how has it changed, because it's been 15 years now since the diagnosis? Can you share a little bit about the transition after the diagnosis as well?
Sure. Uh, I I was just desperate, and we would go and Belle thought too that she had Alzheimer's, and of course, with an
Mm,
Alzheimer's diagnosis, you just look online, as we all do. We start Googling, how long will she
yeah,
have?
Dr.
uh,
Google, yeah.
yes, thanks, Google. And I remember sitting on a bench on Main Street in our little town, sitting there just watching traffic go by, and we were glazed over. I mean, we would try to do things that we had never done, like let's
Mm,
go shopping because they're big shoppers. It very, very peculiar. It changed how, and it changes for every care partner, I think. How do we look at life? What do we want? What to be like? And I think right at that moment, we both began feeling tremendous loss because we were, I think, looking in the rearview mirror at everything that we had and beginning to say goodbye. When in reality, of course, as I mentioned a minute ago, we've had a lot of wonderful quality time, and my wife is very high functioning. What her really is about affects the senses. Too much stimulation or noise and bright lights and things like that are difficult. So we are not do a lot of socializing. One of the things that I mention in regards to a personal experience with ambiguous grief, this idea of losses that continue to happen day in and day out, are the fact we used to go dancing. And
I just want to ask if you had a really healthy social life, or a very active, I should say, healthy can be either or, but a very active social life before.
Belle continues to be my champion, which is just incredible. Wants me to go out, have a life. Please, Cheryl, go out, do something, be with friends. And I remember time going dancing, and I went dancing and I met a friend to go dancing, and I realized, I want to do it. And I came out and walked around for a long time, basically tears streaming down my face, realizing we would never go dancing together again. So that's
already such a big part of the ambiguous grief, everything that you realize that is over now, you can't do anymore. How do you deal with that? Because now you coach people on that, which I love. I love that you, after your own journey of walking through that, of working through it, that you came out on the other end and now help other people to do the same thing. How did you find your own way out?
With a lot of help, my own mentors and body work. I cannot say enough about body work. Realize,
I agree.
What are we feeling in the body, and we don't have to try to change it, just to notice. Our thoughts really begin. They have an origin right in our bodies, and we forget that. Try to live in our heads, and I think for me, that also trying to understand that and come to terms with that really led me to understanding. And I still work on what am I feeling in my body, but also I've have a deep interest in mindfulness, and I do guided meditations and moving my own body with Tai Chi and meditation, noticing our breath. It's not so easy sometimes to get caregivers to, come on, breathe with me. Let's breathe. Just your breath. Come home.
But it is so, that it's really interesting that you say that, because it's one of my absolute favorite go-to tools, where I often talk about this, the power of one big breath, one deep breath straight into your heart, because often we don't have the energy, the time, the focus, the whatever it takes to actually take time out for this whole breathwork session. But sometimes just that one deep breath straight into your heart, it really brings you right back into the presence. And I love that. Like body work, breath work, it's all such an important part of healing. And in particular, when it comes to ambiguous grief, this is such an ongoing process and ongoing underlying, and sometimes it's like a strong current. Sometimes it's just underlying, and sometimes it really seems to swallow you whole in various moments. I often use that analogy with the ocean. But to be able to know how to act when this wave comes, or when the current seems to just suck you under, to just, float on your back and breathe. That's basically what we do. It's such a beautiful analogy. So you started doing all of that yourself. And I love that you talk about body work. It's so important to me as well.
Right.
Where was the moment? How long did it take you after this beautiful conversation, or a very raw conversation on the lake? to becoming a coach for caretakers? How long did that journey take?
That actually took a while. At the time of that diagnosis, was an artist. We were both artists.
Yeah.
My wife,
Oh,
a poet and a writer and a fine artist using acrylics, and she owned an art gallery. For
yeah.
my end of it was that I was a decorative painter doing trompe l'oeil and stencils and
Yeah.
uh, matching and things in people's homes and on their furniture. So
Oh.
I was self-employed. I've always been self-employed. When we got that misdiagnosis,
Yeah.
I was not even able to go to work. I mean, I just really shut down for a
Yeah.
while. Realized, wait a minute, how am I going to care for Belle if I don't care for myself?
Yeah.
And so time went by, and I also am a big proponent of cannabidiol, which is a CBD from cannabis, and
Mm-hmm.
I sold it for a
Mm-hmm.
while. That's a little bit of a side thing. I had trouble with that and payment processing and all that. So I thought I'm
Mm-hmm.
just going to education for healthcare providers. So then I went to coaching school thinking that that would just be a credential and enable me to do presentations. And I
Mm-hmm.
got very involved in the training itself and realized there's something to this and I can really serve with
Yeah.
this. And
That's
Marie, I think
beautiful.
I'm never done. We're never finished.
Mm-hmm.
Still caring for my wife, and I'm still learning and
Yeah.
exploring. And I think that is what I can bring to others too, is my own experience and what I've
Yeah.
done, how can we.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to bring my favorite one-liner in again because this came to me one day, and it is such a reflection of what you just said as well. I came up with this: we hurt, we heal, we grow, we teach, and I feel this is such a reflection of what we do as a human being. You know, when we get hurt, we heal through that, and then we grow through that healing process, and then we want to pass it on to others because we see when they are going through a very similar hurt to what we have experienced, we want them to heal. We want to help them out of that. And you are such a beautiful example of that. I think it's absolutely beautiful. Um, I would love to ask as well: is Belle still painting now?
No, she's not painting.
But was she
She
still painting after the diagnosis? Did she continue?
she did continue for a while, and the diagnosis
Yeah,
has made it difficult for her to concentrate and focus.
yeah, yeah.
And continued also to be a congregational minister for the congregational church, and she's
Wow.
still preaching very, very part time. And
Wow.
she's just amazing because the congregation understands that she has these issues, and they're just
Hmm.
fully embrace her, and it's just
That's
great.
beautiful. That's how exactly how it should be anyway, especially in that space. I love it. I absolutely love it. Um, what about you? Are you still doing creative work as well now?
I would like to do more. I think that what I do, probably my creative outlet, is really through gardening
Mm,
and some repairs. I do a few things once in a while, but it really was a lot of effort to be loading ladders and drop cloths on the roof of the car and going
yeah,
off. So
yeah.
uh,
I can
I
only
don't.
imagine. I find it so grounding as well doing gardening work. It's really funny because I just spoke to one of my clients the other day about this, and she said before her husband passed away, she never had a green thumb, and I was the exact same. I said neither did I, and both of us afterwards got into this whole. I mean, like I love this plant. A lot of people comment on it, and it was this tiny plant that I got from my boys for Mother's Day a couple of years ago, and a couple of times I thought it's going to die on me, and then I repotted it and I nurtured it, and it's grown into this massive plant. It's got a little child growing in there. I love it. It's
It
really
is.
something that I find very soothing and healing, just to put my hands in the dirt and yeah, just weeding in the garden, whatever it takes. It's just beautiful. And the other thing I've noticed because obviously your grief, my grief is very different because my husband passed and it was instant. Your wife is luckily still very alive and functioning, and it's such a blessing. So after Rob died, I went through this process of massive creativity. I got my spray paints out and I was recycling, upcycling things. I was changing color themes. I was painting walls. I was really into this. The creativity really hit me. That's why I was asking whether you were still doing art, because sometimes that's another outlet as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, quite frankly, I would sometimes I think about it, but I can't. I'm immersed in this current business. So
Of course, of course. And there's only so much of you to go around, and I think you're doing such an amazing job. So tell us a little bit about the work that you do and how do you actually work with people? And obviously, after our interview, we will share links how people can connect with you in our show notes as well. But can you share a little bit about your day to day? How do you work with people?
I'm since COVID has ended, I'm meeting with people a little bit more locally. I live in a very
Beautiful.
small Massachusetts,
Hmm.
but I have always met with people on Zoom. Many of them, even though they're local, appreciate virtual meetings because
Yeah,
then they don't have to find any sort of care for their loved one while they
yeah,
go.
yeah, absolutely.
It works very nicely. Um,
Sorry.
And also, it allows me to meet with people all over the country. So some local, and I think local is actually growing now as my business has grown and a lot more
Hmm.
local. And I do some public speaking
Hmm.
online about this, especially this topic of ambiguous grief, which is
Yeah,
without closure. But
yeah.
I do that, and as I mentioned, I volunteer as a co-facilitator for the Alzheimer's Association as
Hmm.
a caregiver support group. I
Yeah.
also run online and in-person grief groups, and have taken
Mm.
quite a training regarding that, and
Yeah.
caregiver online and in person.
Yeah. I can
Um,
see how you've got your hands full and why there isn't much time left to start painting in that wild ride that you're living here.
um,
Yeah.
just to clarify,
Yeah.
and listeners don't really, I mean, we've been talking about ambiguous grief, but
Hmm.
uh, it was a term coined in the 1970s by a
Hmm.
well-known psychologist named Pauline Boss, and she was very passionate about it. She worked well into her until she died, I think, at the age of 97, just a couple of years ago.
Hmm.
And according to her definition, ambiguous grief is predominantly one of two things. It's it's either a psychological um, presence with a physical absence, and
Hmm.
that does pertain to caregiving, but that an example of that might have been the attack on the Twin Towers in 2001, where people really, really struggled with thinking, not knowing that the loved ones weren't present anymore, thinking
Yeah.
they're out there, they're just out
Yeah.
there, and they weren't able to bring any kind of closure to it, if there's ever closure for grief anyway.
Yeah. Mm.
And the other type of grief, which does pertain to care partners and caring for people long term, is the physical presence and psychological absence. So somebody is there
Yeah.
physically, but deteriorating
Yeah.
mentally.
Yeah.
So I
I
just
think
wanted to,
both. Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you so much for that. It's really, I think both must be extremely hard, like especially when it's such an ongoing thing and you live with a loved one. Can you also share? I know this is getting a bit personal, that's why I asked you before, is it okay to talk about these things? Can you share a little bit with our audience how your relationship changed throughout that?
oh, my relationship with my wife. You know
Yes.
what? I think, well, I can't say that it's, in some ways, it has gotten deeper. The
Mm,
bond is, um, although it's, we've always been, wildly in love, but It's the quality of it, change the quality. And
Yeah.
that is not that I don't have my days where I feel sorrow, or that I don't have my days where I feel irritable. I mean, and we always have to remember we're human beings, we're going to
Yeah.
get pissy and we're going to get
Yeah.
irritable. And
Yeah.
one thing that has really helped me is this idea of practicing some along the lines of some Zen Buddhism, and the idea of impermanence. And I talk to my clients a lot about these concepts, and it just is so helpful to understand that it things are different, and we have a different kind of quality, a different we still have the love, but we have a different day-to-day way of being.
Yeah.
And I don't know if
I
that's helpful.
find absolutely. I find that's so beautiful what you just said. I want to highlight this because I feel this is something that a lot of people forget about when it comes to grief. What you said is, it doesn't mean that we don't have days. Like, the quality is really enhanced. I absolutely agree with that because it gives you so much more awareness, and it doesn't mean that you weren't in love before at all. Obviously you said you were madly in love already before, which is so beautiful. Congratulations to that, because that's a gift in itself. Yet also, once you have this awareness, how much it increases the depth of conversations or the quality of a relationship, and that you still have days where it's absolutely not fun. Like, I feel that a lot of people have this assumption that grief only has space for sadness. And I don't think that's true at all. And it doesn't matter whether that comes to ambiguous grief or any other form of grief. I feel there is space for every emotion.
Right.
But it seems that we are trained that when we're grieving, we just have to be sad and we fall apart and that's it. And this is the big thing, the work that I do, where I'm really, really big on, let's shift that paradigm of grief. Let's just talk about what it actually is. Let's bring more lightness into grief, because grief can also bear a lot of gifts. I talk about the hidden gifts in adversity. And
Yes.
that is, for example, that it brings more depth into conversations. And I can only imagine that some people will go like, yeah, but my husband has died. Yes, my husband has died too. Yet still, there is more depth in conversations with other people now. There's more depth and more closeness with my boys. Like, as you said with your wife, we were already a very close-knit family before Rob passed, but after he died, what happened between the boys and I was incredible, and still is. We have this really close, intense, beautiful bond, and I can only imagine that it would be the same for you with your wife now, that it has really strengthened that bond, that it has also reiterated in terms of where you stand as a couple, as partners, as the choices that you made to be with each other in life. That it's almost like, I've never been a big believer in renewing vows for whatever reason, but that's for another podcast. But it would be something similar to that, the situation that you are in, that there is this, yeah, this strengthening of that bond. How did
Right.
you feel? Was that a slow, ongoing, growing process? Was that an instant realization? How did that come for you?
I think that it's a just a process that
Yeah.
it wasn't anything that I sat down or Belle sat down and said, well, let's get a book, we have to deepen the relationship.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's something that just organically happens. If
Mm.
you made a really beautiful point, Marie, if we allow for it, if we
Yeah.
give it, and if we allow for all the emotions that happen day in and day out along the way,
Yeah.
what's the new things that we can laugh at? And if we're angry, what are we angry about? You
Mm.
know, and if we, one of the things that I work with a lot with care partners is forgiving themselves, because they are
Mm.
filled with so much guilt.
Yeah.
I'm right, or I what I'm faced with, making this choice, and I think I'm screwing up, and people have a really hard time forgiving themselves, and we get stuck there. And so it's to allow and realize we're human. We're human.
I really love that. Do you mind talking a little bit with me about anger? Because for me, anger, I've always referred to anger as a cover-up emotion. There's usually something underlying that triggers that anger, and anger is just easier because it's more impulsive to express. So for me, it is often either grief or the vulnerability, frustration, guilt, whatever underlying that then triggers the anger. How's your perception of that?
I completely agree with you, and I think that anger is sometimes it gives us the fuel to keep moving. It serves a purpose. But I totally agree with you, and I think that mostly what's under anger, if we get still and allow and really explore our anger, we're frightened. I think we're frightened.
Yeah,
we
that's
are
a very interesting point. I agree wholeheartedly.
frightened of the uncertainty of life. We want to know what's next, and we want to be in control, and we can't know what's next, and we can't, even though we think we're in control, we're not. And so when that becomes obvious, we get angry often, and it, it frightens us to not be in control. It really does.
Yeah. And at the same time, that's basically exactly what life is anyway. We're never in control. There's just the illusion of it. We have moments where we think we are in control, but we actually are not. And I often think about that, in particular now that I speak about my story quite a lot. And I have a speech come up next week. We just talked about that briefly, where I share this moment. And Rob's death was so sudden. It was instant. There was no pre-warning. He had a brain aneurysm. And that is just such a deep reflection of how little we are in control of what's going to happen in life, And it made me smile a little, obviously not that he passed, but thinking about what Rob said to me, he said, you often get asked this question at interviews, at job interviews, where do you see yourself in 5 years from now? And he said, oh my goodness, if somebody would have told me a couple of years ago when we just got together, I would be sitting here with this beautiful woman, having a family, living my life where we are now near the beach. And he was so full of gratitude. He was so full of love. That was Rob to the T, always. And then I thought about the same thing. I really reflected on what he often shared about this 5-year question. It's interesting that he talked about that so much, and then his life was ended so abruptly. So then I was sitting here thinking, I would have never thought that, a week before his passing, I would have looked at my future in absolute different ways to what I did a couple of weeks later, months later, now years later. And it's just incredible when we come to the point where we just open our heart completely to this acceptance of that we're not in charge, but we are in charge of what we do right now. Right now, that's where the choices are. And I think you and Bella are just such beautiful examples of living that.
Thank you. You you just caused me to take a big deep breath. Like, yes,
it's incredible. Life is such a gift. Yeah. Well, I'm coming to the favorite question towards the end of our podcast. If you could choose just a couple of things or one thing that you would really like the audience to take away from this, what would that be?
Well, to remember that when we think we're not doing it right, to remember to ask yourself what is right, there's no right or wrong. If we do something with the right intention and love in our hearts, we're doing it right. And my body worker just said to me the other day, and we wrote it down, we laughed. It was a good line. She said, the only thing we need to fix is the need to fix.
Oh, I love this. Oh, I love this. Oh, this is so incredible. Yes, I think I need to write this in big letters on my whiteboard. The only thing, say that again, please. The only thing.
The only thing we need to fix is our need to
Yeah,
fix.
yeah. I'm gonna write this down. This is brilliant. I think I need to look at that for a little bit. Cheryl, I cannot thank you enough to be here with me. This is really such a beautiful conversation we just had. I'm really, really grateful for that. I'm so happy that you two have each other, and for a lot of people to have your support to go through this journey. So, do you want to quickly share where people can find you? And we will then put the link in the show notes as well. But if you want to share it now.
It's really easy. It's my name, CherylHutto.com is my
Mm-hmm.
website. There's a
Perfect.
place you can send me a message, or you'll see
Yeah,
my email there, or book a
yeah,
free call, whatever works.
perfect. We'll definitely put the links in the show notes. We will also share the link of your LinkedIn profile so people can connect with you. And with that being said, I thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing straight from your heart. And this is Cheryl and Marie signing off. Bye for now. Thank you for listening.